It's a very bright and warm afternoon in August on the island of Hawaii. I wanted to do this video out here for a reason. Can Christianity and climate change be harmonized, or are they ideological enemies? It's a complex topic, but it's worth examining. Let's dig in. On this channel, I talk a lot about things that grow out of my research and writing of my fiction series, Age of the Kingdom. The series follows fictional as well as biblical characters through multiple generations against the backdrop of the United Kingdom of Israel 3,000 years ago, under King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. 3 books are available so far, covering about 70 years. So how do I get from there to talking about Christianity and climate change? Simple, the concept of God's kingdom. In the second novel in the series, Exile of the King, I have King Saul's son, Jonathan, say to David, "It's God's kingdom after all." He said that to assure David that even though Jonathan was in line to inherit the throne, if God had chosen David, that's what mattered. The theme of God's kingdom is everywhere in the Bible, but I wanted to start at the beginning, in Genesis, the first chapter, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image after our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over cattle, and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move on the earth." Here in the very first chapter of the Bible, we find God delegating authority over the earth and the life forms inhabiting it to mankind. God is called the King of Kings. In other words, He is the ruler that stands above human rulers on earth and gives them power. So we humans have a responsibility, not just to rule over the earth, but to care for it on behalf of our Creator. In the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, it says, "The time has come to destroy those who destroy the earth." So God is serious about our responsibility to take care of the earth and not destroy it. When God called Abraham, He promised that through Abraham's descendants, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. It was the beginning of Israel, God's people on earth, and the manifestation of God's kingdom. When Jesus was here on earth, 2,000 years ago, He talked all the time about God's kingdom on earth and how it was His mission to see it established. So if we believe in Jesus, we have a responsibility not just to extend God's kingdom through spreading the gospel, but also to be good managers of planet Earth. When talking about climate change, we are told by the dominant culture that the science is settled and no discussion is necessary. We must move on to action. But is that true? Are the popular conclusions about climate change settled, and are the promoted actions warranted? I think there are many things to consider when discussing climate change, and a lot of those things get glossed over by those pushing the popular climate change narrative. That may be because they have other motives than being good caretakers of God's kingdom. In fact, many of them likely don't believe in God's kingdom. They see no more value in a human being than a bacteria. Climate change is not just one subject. There are multiple questions to consider, and the answers to those questions will determine our conclusions. Here's my list of questions that should be considered, but which those who say the science is settled tell us not to consider. First, is the climate changing? The answer to that question is assuredly yes. I think it's safe to say the climate has been changing as long as the Earth has existed. However, this begs another question. Is this change singular and unusual, or is it part of a natural cycle which appears over and over? The answer given by climate change enthusiasts is that the change is singular and unusual. But is it? Is it possible to find periods of Earth's history in which temperatures were warmer than they are now, for instance? Yes, it is. You will often hear it reported that today is the hottest that it's been since some year in the 1800s. Global warming is the cause célèbre of climate enthusiasts, but if temperatures were warmer at any point hundreds or thousands of years ago, doesn't that indicate changes in climate that we may see now very well may be part of a natural cycle, and that at some point in the future the trend will reverse and temperatures will become cooler again? Some point out that temperatures have been warming ever since the end of the Little Ice Age in 1850. Certainly we would expect climate cycles to be hundreds, if not thousands of years from peak to trough. How one answers this basic question sends us in diametrically opposed directions. If climate change is singular and unusual, then climate change might indeed be concerning. But if it's part of a natural cycle, there's likely nothing to fear and no need to be concerned. But these are only the first questions we need to ask. Let's say we agree that the climate is changing, and change is singular and unusual. The next question is this change dangerous to the point of being calamitous, or might the change actually be beneficial in some ways? For example, if temperatures are warming, won't that allow for longer growing seasons and greater food production? Could global warming potentially solve world hunger? And don't most people prefer warmer climes for rest and recreation? I live in Hawaii, where millions of people spend their vacation money every year in a place that is warmer than most of North America for much of the year. And many snowbirds spend as much as 6 months a year here, only to going to their homes on the mainland during warmer months. They seem to see warmer temperatures as desirable. A big concern of those who fear global warming is that the ice caps will melt and the oceans will rise. So we could ask if the polar ice caps are indeed melting. It appears the North Pole has lost ice in years past, but Antarctica at the South Pole has actually set records, adding a lot of ice. The most recent studies have shown that even the North Pole has recovered ice as well. Perhaps melting ice caps are part of a cycle as well. Of course, if the ice caps could melt completely, as climate activists predict, it could be a problem for coastal areas. However, our behavior has made the potential for disaster greater. In ages past, people rarely lived near oceans because they knew they were dangerous. Even in good times, the ocean can be a threat to human life along the coastline. I live on one of the most remote islands in the world, Hawaii Island of the Hawaii Island chain. We are surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. At any time, that ocean can become a raging killer and a tsunami can sweep us away. We actually had to evacuate for a tsunami this week. Thankfully, it was pretty much a dud where I live. My home is a few yards from the ocean in the tsunami zone, so if a devastating tsunami did come, I could suffer great losses. So I take the threat of rising ocean levels seriously. However, can global warming proponents point to rising sea levels? In other words, has the threat materialized? Some say sea levels have risen, but the change is measured in millimeters over years, and there are plenty of examples of photos taken 150 years ago where the water level has not changed at all. I graduated high school in 1970, and a few weeks before my graduation, the first Earth Day was held. At that gathering, participants predicted calamities that would befall the Earth in the next 20 years, but none of those calamities came to pass. The climate change activists have continued to predict calamity if we don't do something urgently, but none of those predictions ever materialize. But let us assume, for the sake of argument, that global warming is a real threat. The next question we need to ask is, what is causing it? Those who believe that climate change is a threat believe global warming is caused by human activity such as burning fossil fuels, etc., and just about everything that powers life in the modern world. But is that true? There's data to suggest that the global warming we see is caused by the sun. Such things as sunspots, sun flares, etc. There could be other causes as well, many of which humans cannot control. So the next question, can we human beings stop climate change? If the Earth is warming due to natural factors we cannot control, we can't afford to worry about the warming because we can't do anything about it. But let us again grant, for the sake of argument, that human activity is exclusively the cause of global warming, and there are no other natural factors outside of our controls. Can we as human beings do enough to reverse the process? Many things have been suggested. President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Accords, but few people believe that the measures demanded in those accords would have much, if any, impact reversing climate change. The steps required by the accords would be extremely onerous and costly to the signatory nations' economies, except for China and India, the worst polluters, who are largely exempted. For that and many other reasons, President Trump revoked the U.S. involvement in the Paris Climate Accords on day one of his presidency. Most people see the accords as mainly symbolic. So the question is, can we really do anything about climate change, or is it all just symbolism? If the Paris Accords won't do anything, what would be required to really change the trajectory of climate change? Many advocate alternative sources of energy like wind and solar, but it's becoming increasingly obvious that they can supplement fossil fuels, but they can never replace them. Wind and solar just can't produce enough energy to meet the planet's energy needs. To reverse climate change, would we need to stop all mechanized travel, especially air travel? Would we need to stop all construction and manufacturing? No more computers, smartphones, etc.? Former climate czar John Kerry told coal miners and oil workers they would need to go make solar panels, but there's an environmental impact to the production of solar panels also. The storage batteries require the mining of rare earth minerals, and that is very detrimental to the environment. To really end global warming, would we need to reverse all of the advances of the Industrial Revolution and return to the way people lived 500 years ago? Really hardcore people answer yes to that question. If the concern regarding climate change is, if we do nothing, people will die, we also need to ask how many people will die if we go back to the way humans lived 500 years ago. Are we willing to sacrifice the advances we've experienced in communication, transportation, and medical care? If we cut back enough to stop climate change, will we also lose the advantages of modern civilization, which have led to the longest lifespan seen in thousands of years? What if we did reverse the advancement of scientific knowledge and people began dying of starvation and diseases long thought eliminated, and the Earth continued to warm anyway? So I think you can see that it's hopelessly simplistic to say the science is settled and there is only one course of action to solve the problem. We could very well bankrupt our economies and bring about a dystopian future without making any real difference in climate change at all. And since the climate change predictions are based on computer models and not a certain future, should we destroy our civilization and cause millions to die for predictions we don't even know will ever come true? So our original question was, can climate change and Christianity be harmonized? The answer is that we believers do have a responsibility to care for the earth and rule it, but we also have a responsibility to humanity to enable the best and longest life possible. To me, it appears that the measures advocated by climate activists would destroy all the advances of civilization without making any difference to the climate change they cannot prove is even happening. So Christians should be cognizant of our place in the world and conscientiously care for our corner of the planet. But we should reject the devastating quote-unquote solutions demanded by climate activists. That's all for now. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.